Just over a year ago, the main Russian attack on Ukraine was launched from Belarus, a country long subservient to the Kremlin's will. But opposition still survives there, even though its leader is in exile in Lithuania, convicted in absentia of trying to seize power. She's Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, rooting for a Ukrainian victory that she says could propel her group to power in Belarus. So is she ready for a bloody civil war?
Look, it also might be one of scenarios, but if we...
You say that very casually. A lot of people might die. You ready for that? For now, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is refusing to meet her. His officials have said bluntly her movement is irrelevant. How much damage has that done her? Does she have what it takes to stand up to Europe's last dictator in Belarus and the Russians who protect him? Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Let's talk, if we may, first about the situation in Ukraine. You're obviously in touch with your supporters, people in the opposition there. What are they saying about the stage that the war has reached in Ukraine? What is their opinion of that stage?
So people in Belarus understand that the war in Ukraine was a huge pain for Belarusian people, because Belarusians are supporting Ukrainians in this war. Of course, people wonder how long the war will continue, because it's people's lives, it's ruined cities, and of course our country is also influenced by this war. And people in Belarus understand that it's Lukashenko who became collaborant in this war, that our country became like co-aggressor despite the will of Belarusian people. In our country, about 86% of Belarusians are against participation of Belarus in this war, but Lukashenko became an accomplice, and he provided our territory for launching missiles to Ukraine. But in hearts, of course, Belarusian people don't want to break any connection with the Ukrainians as nation. And
the fortunes of your country, Belarus, and your supporters who are pushing for democracy, these fortunes are intimately tied to what's happening in Ukraine. If Ukraine doesn't win this war and win it decisively, you have no chance of ever changing the system in Belarus, do you?
Oh, of course not. You know, when Belarusian people don't accept this regime anymore, they want changes. They want to release our political prisoners. They chose a pro-European way of development. We will be able, for sure, win this fight against the regime. Of course, the fates of Belarus and Ukraine are intertwined, and I don't even accept the thought that Ukrainians might lose. I believe in the victory, and I believe in the victory of Belarusian people over the regime. Of course, we can't predict how much time it will take, but Belarusian people will never agree to live under dictatorship.
Let's talk about the 15-year sentence handed down by a court in Belarus, which convicted you of treason and conspiracy to seize power. You're now in exile in Lithuania. How worried are you about your safety?
I'm under threat since 2020, and it hasn't changed for a day since then. I don't know how long the regime's hands are, and I understand that, I can be harmed in this or that way, and we might remember the landing of Ryanair flight when 2 people have been kidnapped. But I know that I have to continue my work, and until I am free, until I have support of and protection of Lithuania, I will continue to, I will continue my work.
How do they affect you, these constant threats?
Actually, not really, because I really believe that people who fled Belarus because of repressions, they might feel secure in the Western countries. But of course, we have a lot of troubles because of these trials, because of these trials in absentia, and people might be, and the regime may apply to Interpol, for example, to extradite people. But I see how Belarusians, despite of these threats, they continue to fight.
Your response to this sentence has been that your movement is unstoppable, and if Lukashenko thought otherwise, he's wrong. It may not be the sentence that stops you, but the constant repression in Belarus severely limits what you can do, doesn't it?
Of course, we can do a lot inside Belarus because the level of repressions, of course, influence people a lot, and our movement went underground, and people actually show almost every day small acts of disobedience or sabotage in Belarus. And recently, maybe you have heard that a Russian airplane was blown up by our partisans. So Belarusian regime knows that they didn't manage to stop Belarusian people, and even under huge wave of repression, people continue resisting. And Lukashenko can't influence the mind way of thinking of Belarusian people anymore, and this is the most important.
Well, you say that, but in 2021, you said, if you want a beautiful picture of demonstrations of protesters, we can call people to the streets, but how many victims will it cost us? My question to you, isn't the price for resisting becoming simply too high for most people in Belarus?
People are fighting for their country. People are fighting for their independence. People are fighting for their rights. And of course, our people are sacrificing their freedom, some sacrificing with their lives, but this is the price of living in free Belarus. And we see that 2.5 years passed and people are still ready for this sacrifice. And, the history will show, the future will show how many victims more we will have. But, of course, we would like to avoid all this. And the only Lukashenko is the only person, and his people around him are responsible for these victims. People are ready for this. People are ready to fight.
Do you ever wonder if it's all worth the heartache and the personal sacrifice? Your own husband was given an 18-year sentence, and you have no idea when you're going to see him again, do you?
Yes, I don't have an idea, the same as thousands of people in prisons and hundreds of thousands in Belarus who are actually taken as hostages. But people understand their responsibility for all those who have already sacrificed with their lives, actually. And for me personally, it is my husband who is my motivator to continue this fight. When I look at my children who are asking me every day when they are going to see their daddy, it gives me this push to continue, because of course I'm sometimes tired, of course I'm sometimes frustrated and astonished with these prison terms that are given to people. But you understand that if you stop, it will not change anything for Belarus. So now don't think about yourself, don't think about your personal sacrifice, but continue to do what you do.
Despite all the repression in Belarus, you paint a picture of a much more fluid political situation than others have done. You said a couple of weeks ago, Lukashenko can't control the situation in Belarus anymore. The regime is very fragile at the moment. It might seem monolithic, but it's not. Where is this fragility that you see, and what exactly is Lukashenko not controlling?
So the only thing that Lukashenko is controlling is actual repressions, and through repressions he manages, to keep people in stress. But
well, that's enough, isn't it? That's enough to control the repression. That's enough for him, isn't it, to stay in power?
I wouldn't say so. If Lukashenko managed to change a way of thinking of people, that they understood, okay, we are done, we are not going to do anything else. But Lukashenko is every day waiting, for these acts of disobedience, of these small acts of sabotage. When the war has started, he was sure that he suppressed Belarusian society. And then when Russian echelons were coming through Belarus, 80 acts of sabotage took place on railways. It was unexpected for Lukashenko, and I have mentioned already this blow up on Russian plane. And also Lukashenko can't trust people around him anymore. He knows that people want changes, that people, even around his vertical of power, they understand that there is no future with Lukashenko. He's unshakable in the world, in the Western world at least, in the USA, and he will never be perceived as real leader of Belarus. And people around him, they also thinking all the time, where is the power, or where is the future of Belarus? Not with Lukashenko. And after every act of sabotage, after every sign of resistance in Belarus, we get so many calls from structure of the regime who wants to collaborate with us. It shows fragility of this vertical of power. Lukashenko can't trust people around him anymore. He's always changing people around. He's afraid actually of being betrayed by his personnel.
Well, if things are so bad for him, why don't the people around him get rid of him then?
Because Lukashenko for 20 years, he has been building vertical of power that was focused on him, and he made this through fear, through blackmailing, and people, of course, in the regime, they're also afraid for their lives, for lives of their relatives. And recently a new law, a so-called law, was adopted by the regime that gives them rights, to bring people to death penalty for state treason. It was done because Lukashenko is not sure in military surrounding and people in nomenclatura.
Last week, you spoke of a leaked Russian document outlining Russia's plan to occupy and colonize Belarus by 2030. Are you preparing to take the country by force to prevent that happening?
No, of course, there can be such threats from Russia because they don't see no Belarus, no Ukraine as separate, independent countries. They want our countries to be in the sphere of influence of Kremlin. And the difference between Ukraine and Belarus is that Lukashenko became collaborator in this war. So he selling our independence already now. So
but I want to talk about your so-called victory plan, what's been described as the eventual mobilization of what your movement claims to be some 200,000 people inside Belarus, many of whom are trained soldiers. Are you talking about staging a coup and possibly starting a bloody civil war?
We have never talked about bloody civil war, and this.
But it could lead to that. That could lead to that, couldn't
it? Victory plan supposes to be a peaceful plan. And we are stick to the idea of peaceful changes in our country. We don't want to have any victims, to get any victims according to this plan.
And what if Lukashenko won't leave peacefully? What then?
It's our task to make him live peacefully.
And what if he calls his security forces and the Russian units that are based in Belarus, what if they come to defend him? What then? You're in a fight, aren't you? You have a civil war on your hands. Are you prepared for that?
So that's why it's our task to create as much pressure on Lukashenko now. And we see the world is creating multiple points of pressure on the Kremlin to weaken them, for them not to have opportunity to use this group of military people against Belarusian people.
You think they'll just walk away, give up, see the size of the crowds on the streets and walk away? They didn't do that in February 2021, did they? After the violent crackdown, after the elections that you thought would topple the regime. You said at the time, I have to admit that we've lost the streets. We have no way of combating the regime's violence against the protesters. They have the strength, they have the guns, and they still do, don't they? They still have the strength and they still have those guns.
Yeah, absolutely. But repressions cannot be endless. It's difficult to ruin society that won't changes. And now we see about 15, 17 people are being detained in Belarus every day. If Lukashenko knew that he won this fight, that he controls Belarus, it will not be necessary, to suppress people every day. But he knows that he has to show that he's like a leader here, that he's controlling everything. But he understands that our society has changed, and he will not be able to make people love Lukashenko again. Yes, he can sustain for some time. I don't know how much time it will take, but our constant pressure, creating constant stress to Lukashenko will make him to understand that there is no other way out of the situation, only give up and and step away.
What if you're wrong? He's not a person who gives up. He's cemented in power by the Kremlin security forces, and by their battle-hardened troops. He's not going to just give up and walk away, is he?
So look, but time is changing, and we see that he is, he's looking for support in Kremlin. And this war shows that, for example, Russian army is not so powerful as they wanted to show all this time. And for sure, one day, we will see that Lukashenko lost support from Kremlin, because Kremlin is too busy with what's going on in Russia, and they can't pay much attention to Lukashenko. And Lukashenko is also maybe afraid that he can be replaced with some Russian person. Who knows? Lukashenko is also afraid. So
this is a huge gamble. This is a huge gamble on your part, because if you're wrong and people take to the streets, then there will be a bloody civil war, won't there? If you're wrong.
Look, it also might be one of scenarios. But, if we...
you say that very casually. A lot of people might die. You ready for that?
Look, it's a responsibility of Lukashenko. It is him, who are pushing our country to this possible scenario. But from my side, again, I have to repeat, there can be a lot of ifs. If this, if that, we know what we want. And we know that we are moving into incorrect side. We want peaceful changes in Belarus, and we deliver these messages to Lukashenko's cronies, to his military apparatus. We don't want blood. Yes, Lukashenko can sacrifice with people of Belarus. He can sacrifice with people around him. But will those people in nomenclatura continue to support him in this case? That's the question. And Lukashenko can't be sure in our regular army, at least. He for 28 years, he has been building this apparatus around him, but he didn't invest into regular army. And if our soldiers, I don't know, will see that Lukashenko has crossed all the possible red borders, so they will stand on the side of the people. But of course, I don't want any bloody civil war in Belarus. And
Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, Ukraine is watching very carefully what's going on, and they're not impressed by your efforts or your movement. President Zelenskyy doesn't want to meet you. His advisor, Mikhailo Podolyak, is on record as saying, "We don't see any meaningful activity on the part of the opposition. With all due respect, what's the point in meeting Tsikhanouskaya?" That's pretty damaging, isn't it?
We understand their position. We understand that the Ukrainian government is rather cautious now because actually they don't want to open this second front. And they don't want to quarrel with Lukashenko, though they, after 2020, they didn't recognize the elections.
But they're saying that you're irrelevant. Kyiv believes the Belarusian opposition exerts neither an organizational nor an intellectual influence on Belarusian society. That's a pretty poor review, isn't it, by anybody's standards?
Look, there are different people in the government of Ukraine. We are working very closely, for example, with the Verkhovная Rada. There are Group for Democratic Belarus in Verkhovная Rada and two chiefs of this group, one person from opposition and one person from party Sluga Naroda. So we can't say look, we don't know the thoughts of Zelensky.
But are you
Person.
disappointed by what you've heard from his advisors?
It's not about disappointment. It's about understanding why they're doing like this. But I always say that we will support Ukraine and Ukrainians despite the presence or absence of political dialogue.
By refusing to meet you, isn't President Zelensky just reflecting what most Ukrainians think? They certainly aren't well disposed towards your country after it hosted the invasion forces a year ago. Last week, a poll by the Razumkov Center in Kyiv said 2/3 of Ukrainians would support breaking all relations with Belarus after the war is won. Exactly the same people that you would want on your side. So the idea of a common Ukraine-Belarus front against Moscow, that's not going to happen, is it? They're not well disposed towards you.
I wouldn't say so. Look, I am sure that Ukrainian government...
The polls speak very clearly, don't they?
Who knows? I know that Ukrainian government, they distinguish Belarusian people and Belarusian regime the same as Ukrainians. Honestly speaking, when the war started, we were astonished that Ukrainian people don't understand the situation in Belarus. And in one moment, we became enemies for them. And it took us so long time to explain the situation in our country, about this human rights crisis, about atrocities, about violence. And now the situation is much better than at the beginning of the war. Maybe because not all the people are still understand the situation inside Belarus. But of course, the bravery of Belarusian partisans, the bravery of Belarusian volunteers in Ukraine, they show that Belarusian people are on the side of Ukraine. And I think that Ukrainians, they understand that Belarusian society don't support this war. They are supporting Ukrainians, but of course, on emotional level, it's difficult for them, to say yes, we are happy with the Belarusians. We understand that they are our friends when the bombs are being launched from the territory of Belarus. And our task in informational space to explain that Belarusian people is not the same as Lukashenko's regime.
Despite what you say about the Belarusian people supporting Ukraine, the polls show that your country is really split on the war in Ukraine. An online survey last August by the Chatham House think tank in London showed that there were 45% against the Russian invasion, but 30% backed it and 25% were undecided. It means over 50% of people in Belarus are either for Russia or undecided. If that's right, less than half the country is on your side. Do you worry about that?
Actually, not really, because I know that it's very difficult to hold any polls inside Belarus where people know that for wrong answer, they can be sentenced to 5, 10, and 15
but
years.
But this is a Western poll. This was a poll carried out by a British think tank.
I understand, but it's on the territory of Belarus, nevertheless. So we have to understand how people in countries where Gulag is existing, how they're acting. They will, more understandably, they give the answer that will not lead to repressions towards them and their families.
Very briefly, about your personal ambition, is it to lead Belarus to democracy? What makes you a leader? What makes you capable of doing this?
First of all, I have legitimacy from Belarusian people. Belarusian people voted for me in 2020, and they gave me the mandate to lead country to democratic changes.
That wasn't officially confirmed, was it? Even despite the fact that the election then was widely judged to have been rigged by Alexander Lukashenko.
Yeah, look, officially it was confirmed that Lukashenko got 80%.
But we still don't know exactly officially how many you got, do we?
No, we don't, but we had alternative counting. We had to be very inventive because all the elections in Belarus have been fraudulent, and our IT specialists developed a system of checking of the results of of the elections. But nevertheless, I still communicating with people in Belarus, people who had to flee the country, and I feel this support. And I know that majority of people haven't disappointed in my actions, haven't disappointed in me, and I know that I'm supported by Belarusians. So this support of people gives me legitimacy and right to present Belarusian opinion on the international arena.
So very briefly, you think you're going to be leader of Belarus?
My mandate is to bring Belarus to new free and fair elections. I'm not going to participate in new elections because I gave such promise to Belarusian people. But of course, I will be with the Belarusians. I will use all my contacts in favor of free Belarus.
Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, thank you very much for being on Conflict Zone.
Thank you.
Thank you.